Last week we went through the Temple Mount, the archaeology of the Temple Mount, and this week we are going to speak about the structure, the design, the purpose of the actual temple, the actual Holy Temple. Before I go further, I'd like to point out something. In the book of Yechezkel, the prophet Yechezkel, Ezekiel, has an exchange with God. And basically what God tells him is, I want my children, all of us here, I want the Jewish people to study the laws and the concept of the Holy Temple. And this is what God says to the prophet, that although today we can't really, on our own, build physically the Holy Temple, the third and Holy Temple that we are all awaiting, yet by studying Kol ha'osek bebinyano, by studying the laws involved with the temple, it is considered in the eyes of God as if we are actually taking part in the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. In fact, the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, as you know, for many years encouraged that this time, and this is why we offer the course now, right now, because this time is a time when we commemorate the destruction of the first and second temple. The actual day of destruction will be next week, July 16, 9th of Av, but the 9 days and the 3 weeks really that we are finding ourselves just before the 9th of Av, it's a time of mourning, it's a time of introspection, it's a time of trying to see and find in ourselves ways to accelerate the coming of Moshiach and the rebuilding of the third temple. One of those things that we can do, says the Rebbe, particularly in those days, is to study about the temple. And when we do that, we actually taking part in accelerating the rebuilding of very soon the third and Holy Temple. So first, a bit of history. What you see over here is a picture, an illustration, of course, of the tabernacle, called in Hebrew the Mishkan. Meaning, when you say the temple went through a history, many different places, many different times, as well as several types of structure. It all began from this mini mobile temple. Okay? Why mini? Mini in regards to the big one that we are going to study in a moment. Okay? It was relatively small compared to the big temple in Jerusalem. This first mini temple was also mobile. It wasn't made of stones. It was made of mainly wood and skin of the animal that really created those walls that you can see all around the temple. It was mobile, so the Jews were able to actually build the temple, and whenever they had to move and they had to go somewhere else, they could take it apart, carry the temple with them. It was like a tent, and then eventually rebuild that mini temple, that Mishkan, at the next stop. This is referring, of course, to the time when Jews were in the desert. So you're talking year 2448, 49. This is when, approximately a year after Jews came out from Egypt, on the 1st of Nisan, the following year, they finally built this Mishkan, this temple for God. Basically, and I'll point out a few things right here, this Mishkan served and will serve as the basis for all the different types of temples that will follow. There is a basic structure that you will see here that will always remain throughout all the forthcoming temples that we are going to see. And that is, what you see right over here is basically the sanctuary. This place you can't see through, but this place was divided in two through a curtain. And on the one side it was called the Kodesh, the holy space. And on the other side it was called the Kodesh HaKodashim, the holy of the holies. And it's a different, obviously, levels of holiness, but also there were certain things that were placed, such as the menorah, for instance, in the Kodesh. And then there were certain things, such as the Holy Ark, was placed in the Kodesh HaKodashim, in the Holy of the Holies. The Holy of the Holies was like a perfect Wi-Fi connection with God for Moses. This was the place where Moshe spoke to Hashem directly. It was like Skype conversation. Okay? So they spoke right in the Kodesh HaKodashim. When you read the Bible and the Torah tells you, Moshe says, Hashem needs to speak to me, I'm going for a meeting. Right? Where was that Ohel Moed? Where was that place of meeting? It was right over here. And if I can point it out, it was in this section which inside of the sanctuary was called the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of the Holies. Outside there was basically a courtyard. So you can, you can see the courtyard right here, all around the sanctuary. Inside the courtyard there were different things, including the Mizbeach, the altar, upon which offerings were sacrificed for God. And eventually all that courtyard was surrounded by walls. Walls, as I mentioned earlier, made by curtain, made of the skin of the animal, supported by beams of wood, and something that they were able to easily build and take it apart, so to move from place to place when they were in the desert. They wandered in the desert with the Mishkan, with the mini mobile temple, for about 40 years, and they entered with the Mishkan the Holy Land of Israel with Joshua. As you know, Moshe passed away just before, Joshua took over, and they entered the Holy Land. At that point they settled in Gilgal, place in Israel. But eventually, after several years, was built a more permanent structure that you can see over here. This is called the Mishkan of Shiloh. Shiloh is a city, and this was a place where they built a more permanent one, made of, as you can see, made of stones, that also resembled very much to the structure of the original mobile temple. This Mishkan lasted for about 369 years. Eventually came the Philistines. the Plishtim, they fought with the Jews, and they kind of kidnapped, they kind of took the Holy Ark to the city of Ashdod, and with that, the Mishkan of Shiloh was eventually destroyed. The Holy Ark, which is the main part of the temple, moved from city to city, from places to places, including a place called Kiryat Yearim, and it was still in custody, if you could say, by the Philistines, by the Plishtim, who had, imagine, the Holy Ark. In the meantime, a few years later, during the days of King Saul, they built a little bit before the days of King Saul, they built already a Mishkan that you can see over here, also based on the same structure in the city of Nov. And eventually, during the days of King Saul, the one of Nov was the city of Nov was destroyed, and the Mishkan was transferred to the city of Givon. Approximately, the cities of Nov and Givon had a temple for about 57 years. So we went from the mobile temple in the desert, called the Mishkan, to the more permanent one, known as Mishkan Shiloh, for 369 years, to another one known as Mishkan Nov and Givon for about 57 years. And eventually came King David. King David bought the Mount Moriah, a very significant place, as we spoke last week. This is where Adam was created from. This is where Noah brought offering to God. This is where many things happened, including Abraham took his son Isaac for the Akedat Yitzhak, for the binding of Isaac, a very significant place. King David bought that in order to eventually build the Holy Temple, the permanent temple forever and ever on Mount Moriah. He was about to get ready to build, and God said, "Thank you, but you can't build it. Your son, Shlomo, King Solomon, will build a temple for me." And why? God said, very good. God said, you are a soldier. I mean, you had to use weapons, you had to kill people, human life, for reasons, and for reasons that were validated. However, you still have some blood in your hands. And my temple, I want that temple to be a home of peace and be built by someone who has never killed anyone. And therefore, this will be built by your son, Shlomo. That comes from the word shalom, peace, because during the times of King Solomon, there was peace in the world. So, we're talking over here about 470 years after the Jews came out from Egypt. King Solomon, with the help of about 8,330 workers, for the period of about 7 years, he is building the Bet HaMikdash, the first and holy temple that you can see over here in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, on the Temple Mount.
So that's the first temple?
That's the first one. That's an illustration, of course.
Yeah, of course.
But that's the first one, yes.
So, sorry.
Yes?
So, actually, all this time there are just mobile things and like sacrificing just like a big stone to sacrifice whatever they sacrificed at that time. No temple yet. This is the one.
Well, there was some kind of temple, right? Let's go back a little bit here.
The mobile
you see,
one.
this
Yeah,
one,
okay.
or the one before.
Yeah.
This was a home. This was a temple. This was a place where, in addition to the offering, there was a space with walls and with specific areas and many different services, as we will learn next week, that was going on. The difference is that it was not, well, first of all, it wasn't as big and as magnificent, but also it wasn't permanent. And which means that the holiness also did not permeate it into that particular spot forever. It is only when King David bought that place and King Solomon built that first temple that this place became the holy space for God's home forever and ever. This is the permanent home, finished, done. This is where God dwells forever. This is where the second temple was rebuilt, and this is where the third temple will be rebuilt. Let me give you a few dimensions over here. The building spread over 30 meters length, 10 meters wide, and the height was about 15 meters. About, just imagine a building of 5 floors, 5 stories. The building was built of big stones without the help of any tool made of metal, iron. No iron was used. Which means they had to cut these stones without iron, without metal. Because God said metal is used for war. I don't want any metal being used in my temple. So there was, and it's a long story, but just I'll mention it briefly. There was a worm called the shamir. And that worm has a unique quality, a unique power that can go through a stone and break a stone in two. And King Solomon sent someone in a very special place to get the shamir. They got the shamir, and shamir was the tool, kind of, was the worm used in order to cut and to split all those huge stones that they had to. Yes, the shamir was a phenomenon that was used in the first temple by King Solomon. There are many innovations in that building, including, I'm going to try to point it out, although you can't see it really in the picture. You see those windows over here?
Yeah.
Well, those windows were built differently than all the windows at that time. Meaning, normally in those days, windows were built narrow from the outside and wide from the inside. And the reason is simply because for the light to come in and to expand itself and to shine into the entire room, to illuminate the room. In the temple, they were built the other way around. They were narrow, shkufim atum, they were narrow from inside and wide from the outside. And the reason is because the temple was meant to be a place of light, not to receive light, but actually to spread light, spiritual light to the world, and even the windows were built with that particular touch. The first Bet HaMikdash lasted for 410 years until it was eventually destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar. By Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, the king of Babylon, and with that began what is known the Galut Bavel, the Babylonian exile, where Jews were exiled from Israel and eventually ended up in Babylon. Now, forward, how do you say fast forward?
Fast forward.
Fast forward 70 years. Jews were 70 years in Babylon, went through a harsh time on many levels, Galut, and eventually comes Melech Koresh, Cyrus. He was a good king. He was a kind
Babylonian king?
It was already at the time Koresh Melech Paras. It was already Persian Empire. It was already the Persian Empire in the time of. It was just after Achashverosh, right? So the story of Purim happened in between those 70 years. Okay. In fact, the story of Purim was before the story of Hanukkah. Because the story of Hanukkah is the story that happened during the time of the Second Temple. Purim was during those 70 years in between the two temples. Fact is that in the calendar, Hanukkah falls before Purim. And typically people think that Hanukkah happened before because this is how the holidays are scheduled in the calendar. The truth is, if you go by the chronological order of the years, the story of Purim happened first, and then the story of Hanukkah. So, finally, Melech Koresh allows the Jews to come back to their birthplace, to come back to Israel. They are being led by Ezra, Ezra the scribe, Ezra the Sofer. He was the leader of the Jewish people. He leads them back to Israel, and they begin to rebuild the Holy Temple, the Second Temple. You can see it here, and that kind of describes, if you take a look at the picture, what do you see here?
You can see it's destroyed.
Oh.
Right? Or maybe that's
It's completely destroyed?
No. Rededication.
Rededication, destroyed.
It looks like it looks like the buildings after the war.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So basically what you see in that picture is you see two things. You see destruction, but you see rebuilding.
Yeah.
You see some part of the building is still standing. Or they have been just built, but there is some part that are still destroyed, and that is typically exactly the way the temple was just after Ezra came back. So to make things clear, the first temple was completely destroyed. Ezra is coming back. He's beginning to rebuild the second temple as much as he can. Service starts again, and the Bet HaMikdash begins to flourish once again.
Sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
So after how many years approximately goes between the destruction of the first temple
And the second one?
and the second one?
70.
70.
70. 70.
70 between the first and the second one, and then
so
then only 7.
no. So the first Bet HaMikdash, the first temple lasted for 410 years. Comes Nebuchadnezzar, destroys it. There is 70 years of exile where no temple is around.
Okay.
Ezra comes back to Israel. He begins to rebuild the temple after 70 years.
The second
one.
Okay.
Now, the temple is rebuilt, but is not fully rebuilt. And it went through the story of the Yevanim, which desecrated the temple. The Greeks, the Syrian Greeks, the story of Hanukkah with the Hashmonaim. And it went through a period of about 300 years until came King Horus. Who was Horus? Well, Horus was a Jew. He came from a family of converts, Edomites, from the nation of Edom. And he was appointed by the Romans. So we're talking over here after the Persian Empire, after the Greek Empire. We're already now at the time of the Romans, 300 years through the time of the Second Temple. And Horus is being appointed by Rome to govern, to control Jerusalem, or to control Israel, actually. So Horus was a cruel individual. Another fault he has was he was a paranoid, suspicious of everyone. And if he thought that you might be rebellious, he would kill you. Simply, he wouldn't take the chance. In fact, he even killed his own wife. Could you imagine? His own wife. Because he was suspicious. She came from the Hashmonaim, that she may have ideas to rebel against them. So he killed many people, including the Chachamim, the sages, the leaders, the Jewish leaders at the time. He felt that they were, you know, putting his status into doubt, because according to Jewish law, he was not really accepted as a king. He couldn't have been a king according to Jewish law, because a king has to come from a tribe of Israel, not from a convert family. This is the law. We have nothing against convert. On the contrary, we love them, we welcome them, we embrace them. They are Jews just like we are. But there are laws, just like there are things that Kohanim, priests, can do, that we cannot do, meaning Israel. There are things that if you're coming from a certain tribe, you can do, and if I'm coming from a different tribe, I cannot do. There are things that women can do that men cannot do, and vice versa. And this is Jewish law. This is the beauty of the role of each individual in our nation. So the Chachamim, the sages, did not accept really Mr. Horus as being the king. And he knew that. He killed them all, except for one. One of them, because he needed still a wise man to advise him what to do, what not to do. And the name of this great sage was Bava ben Buta. Tremendous scholar, a wise person, but Horus didn't kill him. However, he did blind him. Paranoid. And after a while, he began to remorse. And he felt he should do something to atone his actions. So he called Baba Ben Buta and said, what should I do? And Baba Ben Buta said to Horus, you know, you killed the sages, which are the light of the world. You should go and rebuild the holy temple, which is the light of the world. And this is what he did. So Horus decided he's going to renovate the second temple that began through Ezra 300 years ago, who was not in such a good shape. And he said, I'm not just going to renovate, I'm going to expand it. It's going to be the masterpiece. What you see over here, the Temple Mount was expanded as we spoke last week. The building, the entire building was renovated. And there were all kind of magnificent halls and walls and bridges. And it became the biggest building or project that Horus ever made. By the way, Horus was he was obsessed. It was one of his hobbies. He was obsessed with big buildings and big, Masada. So he built Masada. That was his, according to what I heard, that was his vacationing home, right? And you should see what it is in Masada. It's like a major place with he had this hole and that hole, this other hole. I mean, he was like, he loved big houses and big mansions. Caesarea was also one of those plans. And in any case, the second temple was, to give you some numbers here, you may find them interesting. About 181,000 people were involved in building the second temple of Horus. That included about 10,000 artists and about 90,000 carpenters, 50,000 workers were hired just in Jerusalem. Okay, the Chachamim, once the job was finished, and this is to be found in the Talmud, they said, whoever did not see the binyan, the building of Horus, never really saw a magnificent building in his days. Meaning, this was the most magnificent building that you can see. The Bet HaMikdash lasted, the second one, for 420 years, and about 2,000 years ago, as you can see over here, was destroyed by Titus, the son of Asepsianus, the Roman emperor. Titus came with all his army to Jerusalem, destroyed and burnt the second temple. On which day?
9th of Av.
9th of Av. Okay? By the way, 9th of Av had many other things, including the destruction of the first temple, ironically on the same day. Many other disasters and tragedies in our history, Jewish history, on the 9th of Av, including the spies in the desert when they came back. That was on the 9th of Av, and God's decree that we will not enter Israel for another 40 years. Eventually, many other things happened, including the expulsion of Jews from Spain, 1492, on the 9th of Av. Now that we know a bit of history and some background about the temple, and right now we are going to study the first and second temple, which are very similar. We are going to use this map that you can see over here on the right side. And this map, it's an aerial view of the Holy Temple, which you could see over here. Each time that we are going to go slide by slide into a different spot, as I'm going to show you right now, the map will highlight in red in which spot you're finding yourself in the Holy Temple.
No,
for example,
I understand. So there is that one.
Do you see the red here?
Yeah.
Do you see the red over here?
Yeah.
And so on. Okay? So the red is going to highlight which spot we're finding ourselves.
Yeah.
Just to point out something, anyone knows or anyone remembers, based on last week's lesson, where is the wall of the Temple Mount?
Where is the wall?
The western
The Kotel Amaravi, the western wall.
The west side, but it's down, it's Temple Mount.
I think we can see it here. It should be on
Yeah.
this side, here.
Which one?
No,
Here?
yeah.
This one you say?
No, been further down, I
Or
suppose.
or this wall? Or that wall?
No, I think this wall here. because it should be facing.
This one?
No, I don't think so. It should be, that's the entrance of the temple where you see the door. So
Yeah.
it should be,
Yeah.
it should be on that side.
Okay. So first of all, you all agree that these are not those walls.
No.
No,
Those walls are the walls of the temple that were completely burnt and destroyed. We don't have them today.
Yeah.
Okay? This is where the Mosque of Omar, the big golden one, is sitting. Exactly right over here.
yeah.
The remnant of the western wall that we have today
Then
are
it's, yes.
right over there.
Oh,
And we
in the
are
back?
standing, yeah, and we are standing from the other side. There. Okay? When you go to the Hotel Plaza and you daven and you touch the wall, so you are standing below on the other side of that wall. Well, in this picture I mentioned the wall
Yes,
is over
it's
there, okay?
Yeah.
In that picture, and soon I'm going to okay, in that picture, here
It's
is
there,
it. It's
yeah.
right here. Then now we are standing from the other side,
Yeah.
okay? And in the real picture, which I'm going to show you right now, just give me a second. Here we go,
Yeah.
right here. Okay? The Holy Temple was in that spot.
Yeah.
The entrance that you saw was here. Okay?
Yeah.
Remember?
Right.
And this is how you entered from the east, you enter like this.
Yeah.
Actually, you can enter from here, or you can enter from, remember the bridge was here?
Yeah.
Actually, the bridge took you to the convention center.
Said,
Here, actually, there were those doors, the mouse doors,
yeah.
that you entered through underneath. It was a tunnel, and then you ended up here, and you went to the temple. Okay? And that spot is the Holy of the Holiest.
Yeah.
Okay?
So
The hotel is right here.
the entrance into the temple was east.
Was well, the way people came in, yeah, you're right, that east there was right here, there was an entrance, but the way people came in was more from the south. This is where most people came in and out access was more here. Okay, and the reason for that, why was it here, was simply a matter of practicality, because you have to understand, Jerusalem, now I don't have the full map, but Jerusalem in those days was mainly, the original Jerusalem starts here and it goes down, and it's not in the picture, but it goes down all the way until the end of the valley. This is the original Jerusalem. The original Jerusalem is pretty small.
The city
All
of David.
these, sorry?
That was the city of David.
Correct. That's the city of David, which begins here and it goes down all the way down in the south. This is where David established Jerusalem. Eventually it was expanded and expanded and expanded. The city of Jerusalem that you see today is not near any way to what Jerusalem looked like in those days. Therefore, when people came to Jerusalem, they actually went up from the valley and they arrived here. Once they arrived here, boom, they entered through those doors. Okay? As mentioned, the hotel is right over there. And the main entrance, you can point it out, was here from the south. People enter and they arrive here, and after they would go around and they would enter this door and they would enter the temple and they would stop right over here, as you will see in a few moments. Let's begin our tour of the actual temple. What you see over here is a reproduction of a little fence that surrounded the temple. In any case, what you see over here has an interesting name. For anyone who claims that the Torah is not feminist, the entire eastern section that is surrounded by the red over here, which was the most busy part of the temple, perhaps the most used part of the temple, was called the woman section. Ezrat Nashim. Not because it was only for the women, it was for the men too, but it got the name Ezrat Nashim. Isn't that nice? An entire chunk of the temple is called after the woman. I mean,
Probably
I'm
it was
jealous.
pink.
Probably was pink. Made of pink. It was made of stone, marble. So, what you see over here in the aerial view, I mean, also in the illustration, there were a main space in between, and there were 4 big rooms on each corner. We will first go through the use of each one of those rooms, and then we will go back to the middle, the center space, which was huge, and to find out exactly what was going on there. Let's begin with the eastern northern room. It was called the Room of the Woods. These were for priests, Kohanim, who were invalid to serve in the Holy Temple. Let's say they were handicapped, for instance, and therefore they couldn't serve in the Holy Temple. So they worked in that room checking the woods, because woods were eventually used on the altar for the offerings, to burn the offerings. Wood had to be completely clean and clean of any worms, because if you get worms, that eventually will be an insect that will be dead and will end up on the altar. It would create a state of impurity which you wanted to avoid by checking the wood and making sure that the entire wood was completely kosher. We're moving to the next room, and that was the room of the Nazirim. Nazirim, and Nazir, is someone, in those days was very common. We spoke about vows, so here's a little bit about extreme vows. And Nazir was someone who decided that he's going to kind of disconnect from this world, not to drink wine, not to eat meat, not to touch his hair, and this was a way of spiritual growth, something that was common during biblical times, during Talmudic time, is not common today, and in fact is not something that we would even encourage today. But in those days, this was certainly a part of life, and the Nazir, when he finished, let's say you decided to become a Nazir for 30 days. When you finish your period, you had to go to the temple, and there was a process of an official end of that period that included cutting the hair, that included bringing an offering, and that included also burning the hairs under that fire that you could see. This was basically that room used for. We're moving on the northern western room, and that was called the Room of the Lepers. The lepers, again, something that is not common today, although we have some leprosy. It's not the original, authentic leprosy. Leprosy was more for certain sins that someone may have caused, including speaking bad about somebody else, and the person will get leprosy. And eventually, the Kohen will come and check you and see if you're ready to be pure, because if you're a leper, you had to be excommunicated from the Jewish camps, from the Jewish cities. You were considered impure. You were considered someone who needed some time off from the rest of the community. Eventually, when you were welcomed back, you went to the temple, and there was a process of purification, including going to a ritual bath, which was all in that room that you can see over there. Now, Metzora is not applicable today. It doesn't happen today. It used to be very common in the time of the temple and part of life. You have to imagine life in those days, in some instances, were a bit different than life is today. Finally, on the other side is the room of oil, shmanim. Oil was a commodity that was very needed, very much necessary in the temple. Most offerings had to have oil. So when you came to the temple and said, I would like to bring an offering, say, sure, but you need oil. Where do I buy oil? You went there and you had the opportunity to buy special oil. You couldn't just go to Safeway and buy oil, because the oil had to be pure, it had to be holy, it had to be special, it had to be sealed, and therefore you went there and you found some oil, you bought some oil for your offering, for your card. How did you buy? You would say, well, with money. The Bet HaMikdash had its own, if you want to say, currency. Meaning, it didn't buy with money. You went with your money, or with your gold, or with your silver, to a room that is highlighted there in the red, where you would get like a ticket, or like a little piece of wood, or a little piece of stone, that would say oil, that would say wine, that would say anything that you need. There you placed your money, and with that you can go around in the Bet HaMikdash. It's like a P&E, you know? And you pay P&E and then you get this ticket, and then you can do all kind of games that you want. Same thing was business from in the Bet HaMikdash. Back to the Ezrat Nashim, and at this point, in the center, okay, in the middle of all those rooms, which was a huge space, it was like the big plaza. It was the big space where many great things used to happen. One of them, that you can see over here, is Simchat Bet HaShoeva. Once a year, during the holiday of Sukkot, typically in September, there was a ceremony to go and draw water from the bottom of the valley, known as the spring of Shiluach, and that water used to be, with great festivity, brought to the altar and eventually poured on the altar. And when the ceremony took place, all Jews gathered in that space, the Ezrat Nashim, and they danced, and they made all kind of parties, and it was the happiest moment in the Jewish calendar. They took the old clothes of the Kohanim, of the priests, which were already invalid and couldn't be used, and they made out of it torch. It was so much light that it says that a woman in Jerusalem, during the Simchat Bet HaShoeva, she could check her wheat, right? Or these days you would say the rice, right? She could check the wheat, the good from the bad, from the light that was being projected in the Holy Temple. It was basically the big party. And our sages says, whoever did not experience the joy going on there didn't really experience joy, didn't really experience the party. You know, they think that we put our parties over there. It was not near the biggest party of all, where all Jews were there, men, women, children, during Simchat Bet HaShoeva. Another very important ceremony that used to take place in that big space, Ezrat Nashim again, is Hakhel. Hakhel was basically once every 7 years. All Jews, men, women, children, all Jews had to be there. The grand reunion. Obviously the meaning of it, the significance of it was unity, strengthening unity, and this happened every 7 years. The women used to be, as you can see, on the balconies over here. On the balconies over here were the women's sections, and they were made on top of all the 4 rooms that we saw. The men used to hang out down below. There was a big platform built in the center where the king used to go up and read portions of the Torah, namely from the book of Deuteronomy, and it was a major display of unity. Now we're moving on west, and we're going up 15 stairs, and we have these huge doors that are right in the center of the Holy Temple, and this would be the entrance to the next section. A little bit about those doors. To understand the temple, everything you touch and everything you see has a story. So those doors were huge, big doors made of copper. And they are called the Gates of Nicanor. Who was Nicanor? Nicanor was a fellow that decided he wants to donate doors to the Holy Temple. He made those doors in Alexandria in Egypt, and he brought them on a ship, and in the middle there is this huge storm that began. The ship is shaking, and the people says to Nicanor, listen, we have to get rid of some stuff because we are all going to sink over here. So he says, well, let's get rid of this, let's get rid of that, but don't touch the doors, this is for the Holy Temple. They were huge and heavy. And finally said, listen, Nicanor, it doesn't stop. We've got to get rid of the doors. And Nicanor says, oh, take one. Please, I'll keep one. They take one and they throw the one. And Nicanor is completely destroyed. The storm doesn't stop, and after a while they go back to Nicanor and they say, we've got to take the second one. And Nicanor says, listen, yeah, put himself on the door, and he says, go ahead, if you throw the door, you throw me as well. And when he said that, his dedication for the temple, the storm stopped. Eventually Nicanor is happy, he still got one door, but he's sad because the other door is left out. They arrive to the port in Israel, and guess what? The big surprise. The second door followed the ship all the way until it arrived at port. Obviously that story reflects the dedication of a Jew to the home of God. And those two doors were named after him, and they were chosen obviously to be the doors of the main entrance towards the next section. The next section is simply called the section, the Azara. The Azara includes all kind of many rooms, many uses. All the major services of the temple used to take place there. The holiest place of the temple is also inside. Tonight we are going to go through some of it, not all of it, because more we are going to discover while following the Kohanim. Remember, next lesson we are going to follow and take 1 day tour with the Kohanim. What were they doing? So what were they doing? We are going to discover in detail some of those rooms and some of those spaces and uses that took place in that section. Today we are going to go through some of it, and let's begin with the house of Aftinas. Half of Aftinas was along, see we don't have the map here, but was along the northern wall of the temple. Northern wall, remember, was this one. Aftinas was a family of Kohanim that had a very special recipe, a secret how to prepare the incense, the ketoret. The ketoret were a major, very special and unique service that you could do in the Holy Temple, and that was a special privilege to know and to be part of the preparation of those incense. The only thing is that the Talmud speaks about this family, saying that with all due respect, one thing was not appropriate, and that is that they didn't want to reveal, to pass on the secret to other families of priests, because they wanted to remain the privilege among their family only, and that in the eyes of the Talmud not considered a very inappropriate thing to do, but you've got to also share privileges with others as well. This is an actual picture found in a house of the holy city of Jerusalem, believed to be a house belonged to priests, where incenses were being prepared. Why is it believed to be? Because if you can see it, all the utensils, all the jars, all the cups, everything in that home was all made of stone. And that really goes back to some Jewish legal implications in terms of the laws of purity and impurity. Remember, purity and impurity was a big part of life in those days. And it was almost like technology, you know? Technology today is a big part of life. Anyone's got technology. In those days, purity was, if you can imagine, every house, everyone was touched by, are you pure, are you not pure, you go to the temple, you don't go to the temple. This was the thing. Now, priests had to be pure, especially priests who were involved with the service of the temple. The incense, for instance, that were prepared in their home, in this case, had to be, and at all time, remain pure. The problem with wood is that wood can get contaminated by impurity. Metal as well. Stone doesn't. Stone doesn't receive impurity. And therefore, those who were involved with preparing stuff for the temple, they made sure to protect themselves and to protect their services, that their entire home only had utensils made of stones. This is something was discovered just recently through the archaeological research that are going on in Jerusalem. Something fascinating, by the way, to actually discover and see that what you read in the books, this was in fact real life. Let's move on. This is Lishkat Lechem Hapanim. There was a family of Kohanim, family of priests known as Garmu. And they also had a very special, unique way of preparing the bread. Bread was offered onto, it was part of the daily service, it was placed onto a table or piece of furniture, if you can call it. We'll see it a little bit later. And the bread was made in such a way and in such a shape that was very difficult to make the bread in a way that the bread doesn't break and doesn't fall apart. They knew how to do that. And this is where it used to be prepared. Major space, major room, that was the Heichal, that was the sanctuary. The Heichal, the sanctuary, was one of the holiest places of the Holy Temple. Inside, as you will see, there was a section called the Ulam. So the Ulam was right over here. Then they had a second section called the Kodesh, right here. And after the line, there was the third section called the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of the Holiest. So this building that you see over here was obviously the tallest building of the entire temple. In front of the Ulam, just to point out something quite cute, I should say. You can see here there were pieces of gold in the shape of grapes or vine. And that was basically the bank in the Holy Temple. Whenever someone donated money, they turned it into gold, and they made the gold in the shape of grapes, and they attached the grapes there. And whenever they needed some money in order to renovate the temple, to buy something from the temple, well, just go to the bank. They went there. They took a nice little grape, about $1,000, another $1,000, another 3,000, and hop, they had what they needed. So this was right in the Ulam section, right before you enter the Kodesh. The Kodesh included many things that you're familiar with, such as the menorah. Okay, menorah was a daily service. Every day, the priest, the Kohen, went and lit the menorah. Where? There, right here, in the first section of the sanctuary. There was also, as you can see, a golden altar upon which they sacrificed or they burnt the ketoret, the incense. There was there, you see it in small, the shulchan apanim, the table upon which the special bread was placed on, and this was considered a very holy place. Finally, a place that we can't really see is the Holy of the Holiest. It was behind the curtain. Remember, see that curtain over here? Behind that curtain was an empty space that only had one thing, the Holy Ark. The Holy Ark was, as you can see, a box made of gold, wood, gold. Inside there were the 2 tablets that Moses received at Mount Sinai. This was the exact size of the actual tablet, meaning there was not any empty space inside the box. The tablet fit exactly the space that they required, and that's all. It was completely full. That follows the law that in the temple there was nothing that was just for waste. Even the space of that box, there was not a space where you would say there were an inch of just space, of air, where it wasn't used. Not in the temple. It was completely filling up the entire space of the box. By the way, this Holy Ark that you see only was there in the first temple era. During the second temple era, they didn't have the Holy Ark because King Solomon took it and he foresaw what's going to happen eventually, so he took it and he hid the Holy Ark below the Holy Temple. Below, there was a spot which he built originally.
In the second temple.
In the first temple. I mean,
in the
first temple, there was a kind of a cave. Around the same spot where the Holy Ark was sitting on top, there was a cave built by King Solomon, that when the day will come and before he pass on and before the destruction of the first and all kind of things that will happen to Jews and to the enemies of the Jews and so on, to secure the Holy Ark, that no one should have access to it, no one should touch it. So in fact, Rome, when they came, and they took a lot of things, right? But the Holy Ark, they didn't. The Holy Ark, they don't have it. The fact is, as told in the Torah, King Solomon hid already the Holy Ark before anyone can eventually touch it. In any way, the Holy Ark was the holiest thing ever. This is where, if you remember, we talked about the cherubs, okay, the cherubim. I don't know if you were there at that lesson. We talked about them. They were made of gold and they were placed right on top of the Holy Ark. And the Shekhinah, meaning God's voice, went through right in between over here when he spoke to Moses, when the high priest came in on Yom Kippur, which was the only day the high priest could go in. This was where God was. dwelt, clearly in a revealed way. This first mini temple was also mobile. It wasn't made of stones. It was made of mainly wood and skin of the animal that really created those walls that you can see all around the temple. It was mobile, so the Jews were able to actually build the temple, and whenever they had to move and they had to go somewhere else, they could take it apart, carry the temple with them. It was like a tent, and then eventually rebuild that mini temple, that Mishkan, at the next stop. This is referring, of course, to the time when Jews were in the desert. So you're talking year 24, 48, 49. This is when, approximately a year after Jews came out from Egypt, on the 1st of Nisan, the following year, they finally built this Mishkan, this temple for God. Basically, and I'll point out a few things right here, this Mishkan served and was really on our own build physically the Holy Temple. The third and holy temple that we are all awaiting. Yet, by studying Kol ha'osek bebinyono, by studying the laws involved with the temple, it is considered in the eyes of God as if we are actually taking part in the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. In fact, the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, as you know, for many years encouraged that this time, and this is why we offer the course now, right now, because this time is a time when we commemorate the destruction of the first and second temple. The actual day of destruction will be next week, July 16, 9th of Av, but the 9 days and the 3 weeks really that we are finding ourselves just before the 9th of Av, it's a time of mourning, it's a time of introspection, it's a time of trying to see and find in ourselves ways to accept. Last week we went through the Temple Mount, the archaeology of the Temple Mount, and this week we are going to speak about the structure, the design, the purpose of the actual temple, the actual Holy Temple. Before I go further, I'd like to point out something. In the book of Yechezkel, the prophet Yechezkel, Ezekiel, has an exchange with God. And basically what God tells him is, I want my children, all of us here, I want the Jewish people to study the laws and the concept of the Holy Temple. And this is what God says to the prophet, that although today we can't serve as the basis for all the different types of temples that will follow, there is a basic structure that you will see here that will always remain throughout all the forthcoming temples that we are going to see. And that is, what you see right over here is basically the sanctuary. This place you can't see through, but this place was divided in two through a curtain. And on the one side it was called the Kodesh, the holy space. And on the other side it was called the Kodesh HaKodashim, the holy of the holiest. And it's a different, obviously, levels of holiness, but also there were certain things that were placed, such as the menorah, for instance, in the Kodesh. And then there were certain things, such as the Holy Ark, was placed in the Kodesh HaKodashim, in the Holy of the Holiest. The Holy of the Holiest was like a perfect Wi-Fi connection with God from accelerate the coming of Mashiach and the rebuilding of the third temple. One of those things that we can do, says the Rebbe, particularly in those days, is to study about the temple. And when we do that, we actually taking part in accelerating the rebuilding of very soon the third and holy temple. So first, a bit of history. What you see over here is a picture, an illustration, of course, of the tabernacle, called in Hebrew the Mishkan. Meaning, when you say the temple went through a history, many different places, many different times, as well as several types of structure. It all began from this mini mobile temple. Okay? Why mini? Mini in regards to the big one that we are going to study in a moment. Okay? It was relatively small compared to the big temple in Jerusalem.